Chapter 1. Awakening Stratos. Kia Kai stared through the reinforced glass at the creatures below, her breath fogging up the cool surface of the observation deck. The glowing screens around her hummed quietly, but her mind was far from the sterile lab. She had always imagined that the future would be full of wonder, full of promise. But now, standing in this high-tech facility on Terra-9, she couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's ambitions were crossing a line they shouldn't. Below her, the cyber tigers paced restlessly in their enclosure. Towering, sleek bodies covered in a mix of organic fur and shimmering, metallic enhancements. Their glowing eyes flickered with an unsettling intelligence as they prowled. They were beautiful in a way that unsettled Kia. These were creatures of myth, legends of an ancient world, now twisted into something both wondrous and terrifying. "Dr. Kai," came the voice of her colleague, Dr. Marcus Cole, over the comms. His voice was tight, almost like he was trying to sound casual. "We're ready for the next phase of the procedure. Are you coming down?" Kia hesitated. Her fingers brushed the edge of her tablet, flicking through data, analyzing the biological and cybernetic enhancements. The tigers had been dormant for so long, waiting to be revived. Now they were awakening again, but not to live free. No, they were being reborn to serve. Kia had joined the research team out of a sense of duty. A call for scientists to come study the animals, these extraordinary creatures from another era, creatures that had once protected the planet, now under threat from humanity's technological greed. The company that had funded this mission, Stratos, had promised to focus on studying them and ensuring the planet's preservation. But Kia had heard whispers. Whispers of plans to weaponize the tigers, to turn them into something more lethal than nature had ever intended. She took one last look at Stratos. The largest of the tigers, its sleek black and silver coat shimmered like a mirror in the dim light. The metal implants along its spine and legs hummed softly, powering up, its artificial intelligence flickering through its neural network. Stratos was different from the others. There was something alive in its gaze that set it apart, a spark that Kia couldn't quite place. It wasn't just a machine, it wasn't just an animal. It was something more. Kia turned away from the glass and made her way toward the lab. She passed through several security doors, each one unlocking with a satisfying click as her retinal scan cleared her path. The facility was sleek, cold, too sterile. She had always hated the lack of warmth, the feeling that every corner was under surveillance. It was a far cry from the lush forest she had once studied in her research days, before the call to Terra-9 had dragged her into this corporate nightmare. Dr. Cole was waiting for her in the center of the lab, surrounded by a group of technicians who were preparing the next round of cybernetic augmentations for the cyber tigers. Kia glanced at the monitors. A series of flashing red lights and complex graphs suggested that the creature's neural enhancements were reaching peak activation levels. "Dr. Kai, we're going to need your expertise. Stratos' biosignature is stabilizing, but it's fluctuating more than we anticipated. Could be the storm outside affecting the magnetic fields," Marcus explained, clearly a little uneasy. His hands were trembling, something she didn't often see in him. Kia nodded but couldn't shake the tightness in her chest. Storm. The storms had been growing more violent since the tiger's revival had begun. There were whispers among the crew about the connection. Something about the tigers being able to manipulate the planet's weather systems. A myth? Maybe. But Kia wasn't ready to dismiss it just yet. She knew enough about Terra-9's ancient ecosystems to know that the balance of nature had been finely tuned by forces far more intelligent than they could comprehend. "Let's see if we can stabilize it manually," Kia said, stepping forward to the control panel. She began typing commands into the console, adjusting neural frequencies, fine-tuning the AI syncs. As she worked, she felt the familiar hum of power run through her fingers, but something else lingered in the air, an almost prickling sensation like static before a lightning strike. "Doctor," one of the technicians, Juno, spoke up nervously, "Stratos' vitals are spiking. It's like he's aware of what we're doing." Kia froze, her fingers hovering over the controls. "What do you mean, aware?" Juno swallowed. "The other tigers, they're calm. But Stratos, he's agitated. He's reacting to the neural links we're establishing. Almost like he's rejecting it." Kia's pulse quickened. Rejection. She had heard about these kinds of reactions, artificial enhancements that the subjects resisted. But this wasn't just resistance. This was something else. Without thinking, she tapped into the system's secondary neural interface, one she had installed as a backup in case things went wrong. As the neural synchronization data flooded the screens, Kia's eyes widened. A subtle but distinct pulse of energy rippled across the system. And then it happened. A sudden thought, sharp, clear, and unbidden, pierced her mind. Leave this place. They're going to use us. Kia recoiled, her heart hammering in her chest. She glanced at Marcus, but his back was turned, completely unaware of the strange connection she had just felt. Did you hear that? Kia whispered, her voice barely a breath. Marcus turned. Hear what? I think it's Stratos, Kia said, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. He's communicating. Before Marcus could respond, the lights above them flickered and went out. A low rumble shook the ground, vibrating through the walls, followed by the sound of deep, primal growling. The tigers below, the real ones, the cyber tigers, were no longer calm. Stratos was leading them. The other tigers howled in unison, their mechanical limbs stomping against the steel floor, a chorus of anger and power. Kia felt a shiver run up her spine. The storm outside was escalating, and Stratos, with all his cybernetic intelligence, was more than just a weapon. He was a warning. Chapter 2, The Awakening Storm. The growling was deafening now, shaking the walls of the facility. Kia's heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled for control. The screens in front of her flashed with warnings, static spikes, irregular neural patterns, and sudden electrical surges. The power grid was faltering, fluctuating with the same intensity as the cyber tigers' rampage below. Marcus rushed to her side, his face pale. What's happening? Why are they reacting like this? Kia's mind raced as she scanned the data. The storm outside had worsened. Lightning crackled violently in the sky, bright enough to illuminate the entire compound. She could feel it in the air, a tension that seemed to be spreading, moving inward toward the heart of the facility. Stratos, she thought again. He's at the center of this. Stratos is more than just a subject in this experiment, she muttered, almost to herself. He's connected to the planet. He feels the storm and he's trying to control it. The tigers, they're responding to him. What do you mean? Marcus asked, his voice rising in panic. Are you saying that they're? Kia shook her head. They're not just bioengineered animals. The corporation didn't tell us everything. Stratos, he's more than just an animal, more than just a machine. He's attuned to the planet systems, like the old legend said. He can manipulate the environment around him. Like controlling the weather? Marcus's voice cracked, incredulous. Kia's breath hitched as the alarms blared. Stratos was waking up. Fully. And whatever control they thought they had over him was slipping away. Before she could respond, the ground beneath them trembled again, this time harder. The ceiling lights flickered, then died altogether, plunging the room into darkness. A soft red emergency glow illuminated their faces, casting eerie shadows over the walls. But in the silence, there was something else, an almost imperceptible hum, like the roar of distant thunder, yet closer, stronger. It wasn't the storm outside. The glass windows above them rattled. Through the steel beams and thick walls, Kia could hear the heavy thuds of Cyber Tiger's footsteps pounding across the facility. They were no longer confined to their enclosures. Damn it, Marcus hissed, his hand flying to the communication panel, but it was useless. The system was overloaded. Kia's eyes darted to the monitors showing Stratos' vitals. The tiger's neural activity had skyrocketed, beyond what any human could comprehend. Then something even more unsettling happened. A low, vibrating hum started emanating from the tiger's holding chambers. The walls shook with the force of it, a resonance that vibrated through every cell in Kia's body. The communications system sputtered to life for a brief moment, crackling as static filled the air. Help us? The voice was unmistakable. It was a thought, a command sent directly into her mind. The voice was calm but filled with urgency. It wasn't just Stratos, it was all of them. All the cyber tigers. They were trying to reach her. Kia's heart raced as the intensity of the message grew stronger, a deep sense of fear and desperation radiating through the mental link. They were aware of their captivity, aware of the treatment they had endured. We can't stop them, can we? Marcus's voice was quiet, strained as he stared at the monitors, his face drawn tight with concern. The tigers were growing more restless, more volatile with every passing moment. Kia clenched her fists. I don't think we can. But I'm not going to stand by and let them be used as weapons. They're not just weapons, she thought, the voice of Stratos echoing again in her mind. We're protectors of this place. Kia swallowed hard, her throat tight with the weight of the revelation. The tigers had once been guardians of Terra-9, a myth, an ancient story told among the first settlers of the planet. Stratos and the others had been created to maintain balance, to regulate the weather and protect the ecosystem from human interference. Now they were being turned into something else. Something dangerous. Something that might bring the planet itself to the brink of collapse. Suddenly, a loud crash from down the hall snapped Kia back to the present. The Tigers had breached their containment. The emergency lockdown was failing. The hum in the air grew louder. "They're escaping," Kia said, her voice cold. "And they won't stop until they're free." As if on cue, the doors to the research chamber burst open, slamming into the walls with a violent force. Standing in the doorway, illuminated by the flashing red lights, was Stratos. His glowing eyes locked onto Kia, a mixture of intelligence and something else, something deeper, flickering in his gaze. He wasn't the mindless predator they had tried to create. He was aware. His voice came again, clear and forceful, like a thunderclap in her mind. "You will help us or you will fall with the rest." Kia froze. The weight of his words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Stratos wasn't asking. He was demanding. But Kia couldn't blame him. He had been a tool, an experiment, forced to endure far too much. Now he had become something greater, something that could reshape the planet itself. Marcus stepped back, his face pale. "We need to get out of here. They're not just breaking out, they're taking over." Kia didn't answer right away. Her gaze remained locked with Stratos's, the weight of his intelligence and presence pressing down on her. The storm outside was nothing compared to what was coming now. The Tigers were awakening, not just from their slumber but from their chains. And if she didn't make a decision, Terra-9 itself might not survive the consequences. "Stratos," she whispered, stepping toward him slowly, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and awe. "What do you want?" "Freedom," he answered, the word resonating in her mind like a distant echo. "All we want is freedom." And then, in the distance, there was a terrible sound, a roar so loud and filled with fury that it seemed to shake the very atmosphere around them. It was the voice of the storm. It was the voice of Terra-9. Kia turned to Marcus, her mind made up. "We need to get to the control center. If we can't stop them, we need to help them." Marcus hesitated. "You're going to side with them?" Kia's eyes hardened. "I'm not siding with anyone. I'm going to make sure this planet survives. Whatever it takes." With a final glance at Stratos, Kia turned and sprinted toward the exit, Marcus trailing behind her. The storm had begun, and it wasn't just a force of nature anymore. It was a war. Chapter 3. The Control Center. The hallways of the facility were eerily silent except for the distant rumblings and the occasional thud as the cyber tigers moved through the complex, their heavy steps shaking the very foundations beneath their feet. Kia's pulse raced as she navigated the narrow corridors, Marcus close behind her. The lights flickered sporadically, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls, and the air smelled faintly of ozone, thick with the energy building outside. Kia couldn't shake the feeling that every moment she spent in this place was one step closer to a breaking point, either for herself, the Tigers, or the entire planet. She pushed forward, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her chest. "How much longer until we reach the control center?" Marcus's voice broke through the tense silence. He was still visibly shaken, his normally steady hands twitching at his sides, but there was determination in his eyes now. Kia checked her wrist device, scanning the map of the facility. "About 2 more levels down. It's locked off, but we should be able to override it. The secondary power grid is still online, but barely." "Great. We're running on fumes here," Marcus muttered under his breath. The ground trembled again and Kia could feel the heat rising in the air. Something in the building's structure groaned. The storm outside had escalated to unprecedented levels. The sky was now a violent shade of purple, lit by cracks of electricity that arced down from the heavens like jagged veins. "We're not going to make it unless we do something fast," Marcus added, his voice tense. Kia's gaze flickered toward the control center's entrance. It was a fortified door, reinforced with heavy metal plating and multiple security layers. They would need to bypass a series of protocols to gain access, but she had installed emergency overrides for situations like this. Still, with Stratos and the Tigers on the move, she wasn't sure if they could get there in time before the situation spiraled completely out of control. "We will," Kia said firmly, her voice steeled with resolve. "I'll override the system once we're inside. But we need to get there first." As they rounded a corner, Kia froze, instinctively reaching out to pull Marcus back. The corridor ahead was blocked by a massive shadow. Stratos stood at the far end, his glowing eyes burning with intensity, his mechanical limbs creaking as he shifted his weight. He was no longer just a curious animal in a cage. Now he was a force of nature, an entity that demanded respect. Behind him, the other cyber tigers prowled in the shadows, their silhouettes dark and imposing. There were at least 5 others, all equally enhanced, all equally aware. They were waiting. Kia's heart skipped a beat. There was a strange stillness in the air, as if the entire building was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Stratos stepped forward, his metallic paw scraping against the floor. "We cannot let you stand in our way." Kia felt a rush of heat course through her veins as the mental link flared to life once more. Stratos' voice was powerful but calm. It was more than just words. It was an overwhelming presence that pressed against her thoughts. "I'm not here to stop you," Kia said, her voice low and steady. "I'm here to help. We need to stop the corporation from exploiting you." Stratos' eyes narrowed, glowing brighter with a deep, almost spectral light. "You are not like them. But you must choose now. The storm is not a metaphor. It is the will of this planet, and we will follow its call." Kia stood firm, her hands clenched at her sides. There was no turning back now. "I've made my choice. Let me through." Stratos tilted his head, the soft whirring of his cybernetic implants the only sound as he studied her. The other tigers remained still, waiting for his command. Finally, Stratos lowered his head as if in approval. "Proceed." Kia exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. She turned to Marcus, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes, his mouth slightly agape. "You heard him. We need to get to the control center now." Marcus didn't need any more convincing. He nodded sharply, and the two of them moved quickly past Stratos and the others. The tigers didn't move to stop them, but Kia could feel their eyes on her, every step under their watchful gaze. They reached the access terminal to the control center in record time. Kia didn't hesitate. She pulled out the emergency override key from her belt and inserted it into the control panel. With a quick swipe of her fingers, the screen flashed to life, bypassing the usual protocols. The door in front of them groaned as it slid open, revealing the heart of the facility. Sleek control panels and monitors lined the walls, displaying live data from every corner of Terra-9. The hum of machinery was deafening in the enclosed space, and the walls were alive with energy, pulsing like a living organism. "Okay, we're in," Kia said, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'll patch into the planetary systems and take control of the weather subsystems." As she worked, Marcus paced, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. He was visibly agitated, his eyes darting between the monitors and the door, as if expecting the tigers to come charging in at any moment. "We need to act fast," he urged. "You don't think they're just going to let us control this, do you?" Kia didn't respond right away. She was too focused on the task at hand. The storm outside was no longer just a weather event. It was a weapon, a tool, and now the planet's energy was intertwined with Stratos' consciousness. The more she worked, the more she felt that connection between Stratos, the planet, and the storm. It was as though they were all tied together, an ancient force unleashed, bound by an intricate web of biology and technology. "Done," Kia said finally, her voice steady. "I've rerouted the system. Now we have the ability to direct the storm." The moment the words left her mouth, the room went cold. The energy in the air shifted, growing dense with power. It wasn't just the storm outside anymore, it was something far deeper, far older. The very essence of Terra-9 was alive, and it was responding. Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed through the control center, followed by a loud crack as the building itself seemed to shudder. The lights flickered wildly and the monitors flashed erratically. A red warning flashed on the central display: planetary systems overload. Kia's heart sank. She had only just begun to understand the full magnitude of what she had done. The storm wasn't just out of control, it was amplifying, gaining power with every second, and now there was no turning back. "It's too much," Marcus whispered, eyes wide. "We've unleashed something we can't contain." Kia turned to him, her face set in a determined expression. "We can't stop it now, but we can guide it. We can help them. Help Stratos." The storm outside, the storm within the facility, roared louder as if in response to her words. And as Kia stood at the heart of the chaos, she realized one thing. The battle had only just begun. Chapter 4: The Heart of the Storm. The air inside the control center was thick with electricity. The humming of the machines had become a low, ominous growl vibrating through the walls. The temperature was rising, and the atmosphere itself felt like it was holding its breath. Every surface shimmered with the pulse of unseen energy, as though the very fabric of Terra-9's ecosystem had been awakened and was now responding to Kia's actions. Kia's eyes flicked to the main console, where the planetary data streams continued to flash on the monitors, displaying irregular, chaotic patterns. The storm outside had crossed the threshold into a cataclysmic event. The weather systems were no longer responding to the planet's natural forces. They were being manipulated, directed by something far more intelligent and more dangerous than any storm. She knew the storm was Stratos. It wasn't just a manifestation of the planet's climate. He had become its core. The ancient guardians, the cyber tigers, they had always been meant to control Terra-9's balance, but now they had taken it into their own hands. Or paws. But something wasn't right. Marcus, Kia called over her shoulder, her voice low. The systems are overloading faster than expected. This isn't just a weather manipulation. Stratos, he's amplifying the energy. The storm isn't just responding to us, it's reacting to him, to his thoughts. It's like he's become the storm. Marcus stood at the far end of the control center, his eyes wide with anxiety as he glanced between the screens and the storm brewing outside. Through the reinforced windows, the violent purple flashes of lightning filled the sky, streaking across the landscape in terrifying arcs. Then we need to shut it down, Kia, Marcus said urgently. Before this whole place, before the whole planet, blows itself apart. Kia's fingers danced across the touch-sensitive interface, but the more she tried to stabilize the system, the worse it got. The surge of energy from the storm was feeding directly into the planetary systems, causing erratic fluctuations. The control center's emergency alarms began to wail in the background, a steady, nerve-wracking beep that seemed to get louder with each passing second. "I'm trying," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But I can't just turn it off. Stratos isn't a system we can control with a simple shutdown. He's linked to the planet itself now. And the more I try to interfere, the stronger the connection gets." Marcus's expression darkened as he approached the control panel, his hands clenched in frustration. "This isn't just about stopping the storm anymore, is it? We're talking about the planet itself, the balance. If we don't act soon, everything we've worked for will come crashing down." Kia froze. She could feel it now, the deep, pulsing rhythm that ran through the air, the storm's heartbeat, beating in sync with Stratos' own. "I know what I have to do," Kia thought, though the words in her mind didn't feel like they were entirely her own. Stratos' voice had become clearer, more insistent. "You're right," Kia said, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "The storm is more than just an event. It's a signal. It's Terra-9 reaching out. Stratos and the other tigers, they are the planet's guardians, the living force that keeps it in balance. They were meant to maintain the equilibrium, not for war, not for exploitation. But the system, the corporation, they've twisted it into something darker." The hum of the building intensified, vibrating through Kia's bones. The tigers, Stratos, had felt her determination. His voice was loud now, surrounding her thoughts with an undeniable force. "Join us. Help us heal what has been broken." Kia's breath caught in her throat as the sensation flooded her mind. It was no longer just a call to action. It was an invitation to become part of something greater. Stratos was not asking her to control the storm, to direct the weather systems, or even to simply stop the catastrophe. He was offering her a chance to become one with the planet, to be part of the force that controlled Terra-9's destiny. But the cost was unimaginable. It wasn't just her mind or her will that would be affected. It would be her very being. If she accepted, she would be tied to the storm, to Stratos, to Terra-9 itself. There would be no return. And yet, deep down, Kia knew it was the only way to stop what had already begun. She turned to Marcus, her eyes steady. "There's only one way out of this, Marcus. We have to let them lead. Let Stratos guide us. We need to help him heal Terra-9, not control it." Marcus's face twisted with disbelief. "Kia, this is insane. You're talking about becoming one with the storm, one with them. You'll be nothing more than a puppet of—" "No," Kia interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm not talking about becoming a puppet. I'm talking about becoming whole. Stratos and the others, they were never meant to be weapons. They were meant to be guardians. The storm, it's not just an attack. It's the planet's way of telling us that we've pushed too far." She turned back to the main console, her hands trembling as they hovered over the emergency override. She didn't have much time. "You are ready?" Stratos' voice said, softer now, like a whisper in her mind. Without another word, Kia made the decision. She activated the primary connection, bypassing the last safeguards and linking herself to the planetary system. As the interface flashed and the storm outside reached its peak, Kia felt a sharp, electric pulse surge through her body, her nerves alight with an overwhelming sensation of power and connection. It was like falling into a chasm of pure energy, a place where her consciousness stretched beyond the limits of her body, merging with something far greater. "Feel Terra-9's pulse," Stratos' voice said again, more tangible now. "Feel the storm's heartbeat, the rhythm of life. And then, as if on cue, the storm intensified. The sky outside was torn open by jagged bolts of lightning, but Kia no longer saw it as destruction. She felt the power of it, the release of pent-up energy, the roar of the wind, the crack of thunder. It was all part of the same being. Part of Terra-9. Part of her. Her breath came in ragged gasps as her senses flooded with new alien knowledge. She could feel the planet's ecosystems, its plants, its waters, the very soil itself. She felt Stratos not as a machine but as something alive, a force of nature working in harmony with the planet's will. The tigers were no longer just creatures. They were the soul of Terra-9 and she was part of them now. Kia opened her eyes, her heart pounding. We're not fighting the storm, Marcus. We're becoming the storm. We're guiding it. Restoring balance. The ground trembled beneath their feet and outside the storm began to shift. The wild, chaotic energy that had once threatened to tear everything apart began to coalesce, focusing inward. The lightning arcs became less erratic, the thunder less deafening. The planet was listening. And as the storm began to calm, Kia realized that the true battle was not against the storm, but for the future of Terra-9. She had joined the guardians of the planet, Stratos and the rest of the cyber tigers, and together they would heal what had been broken. The heart of the storm had found its rhythm. And so had she. Chapter 5, Rebirth. The storm, once a roaring beast, had softened into a steady rhythm. The violent lightning strikes faded into soft arcs of energy that threaded across the sky like veins of silver. The sky, now illuminated with a faint, calming purple glow, breathed in sync with Kia's own pulse. Her body hummed with a new awareness, as though she were no longer just part of Terra-9, but with it as one. The control center's walls still shuddered with residual energy, but the oppressive weight of chaos had lifted. The monitors, once flashing warnings and red alerts, now displayed stable, synchronized data, temperature, atmospheric pressure, and wind patterns all falling into a natural order, as if the planet itself were exhaling, releasing the pent-up tension that had gripped it for so long. Kia blinked, her vision blurring briefly. She felt a strange sensation of floating, her physical form tethered to the room by an invisible thread. Her thoughts, still sharp, were no longer confined by the limitations of the human mind. They stretched outward like threads woven into the fabric of Terra-9 itself. She could feel the pulse of the land, the beat of its heart, the flow of its water. She could hear the deep hum of the ancient systems awakening from their long slumber. But with this power came the awareness of what she had left behind. The storm may have calmed, but the true test was yet to come. Kia? Marcus's voice cut through the fog of her mind. She turned slowly toward him. His eyes were wide with disbelief, but there was something else in them now, a flicker of understanding. He had seen her change, felt the shift in the atmosphere. The storm outside had subsided, but Marcus knew the hardest part was just beginning. You're different? Kia nodded, her voice distant but calm. I'm not the same. I'm connected to Terra-9 now. To the storm. To Stratos and the others. Marcus stepped forward cautiously, his expression a mix of awe and concern. What happens now? The corporation. They're not going to let this go. They'll want the power you've just unlocked. They'll try to control it. Kia turned back toward the monitors, her fingers grazing the cool glass surface of the console. She could feel them all, Stratos and the cyber tigers, their presence like a living pulse in the distance watching over the planet. They were no longer just subjects to be exploited. They had become its guardians, its stewards, and so had she. They'll try, Kia said, her voice steady. But they won't succeed. Terra-9 will never be the same. The balance is restored now. And this time we fight for it, not against it. The doors to the control center slammed open with a sudden, violent force, cutting off their conversation. Kia's senses flared as she felt a sharp jolt of panic in the air. Her connection with the planet's systems flared briefly, and she felt the presence of other humans. A group, perhaps from the corporation, advancing down the corridor toward them. Get ready, Marcus whispered, moving to stand beside Kia. The warning in his voice was clear. The battle had only just begun. Kia closed her eyes, focusing once more. The storm outside still crackled, but now it felt like a call to arms. The tigers, Stratos leading them, were waiting. They could feel the humans coming too. And with them, Kia's resolve hardened. This was no longer a battle to save the planet, it was a battle to keep it free. She reached out with her mind, feeling Stratos's presence near the mountain range far to the west, his watchful gaze protecting their home. We are not alone, Marcus. They will not reach us. The air in the control center grew heavy as a low rumble sounded from deep within the building. The tigers were moving. They had sensed the approaching threat. From the doorway, a figure stepped forward, her silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway behind her. It was Dr. Fallon, the lead scientist from the corporation's research division. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, cold and calculating, made it clear that she was here for one reason only. "Kia," she said softly, her voice laced with both authority and an underlying desperation. "You don't understand what you've done. The storm, it was never meant to be controlled. You've awakened something far beyond what we can manage." Kia met her gaze, feeling the raw intensity of the connection between them. Fallon was no longer a scientist. She was a representative of a dying vision, a vision of control, a vision that no longer had a place in this new world. "I understand perfectly," Kia replied, her voice unwavering. "You tried to use Terra-9, tried to turn its guardians into weapons. But the storm isn't something you can control, Dr. Fallon. And neither are we." Behind her, Marcus tensed. The door shuttered again as more of the corporation's armed personnel stormed the room, weapons drawn, their faces masks of fear and greed. Dr. Fallon took another step forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not in control, Kia. Not anymore. You've bound yourself to something you can't escape." Kia's hand trembled as it hovered over the console once more, but this time she wasn't afraid. The storm outside raged in perfect harmony with her thoughts, a swirling mass of power waiting to be directed. "No," Kia said firmly, locking eyes with Dr. Fallon. "I'm not trying to escape. I'm freeing the planet. And you're not going to stop me." Before Dr. Fallon could respond, there was a sound, deep and resonant, like the earth itself was cracking open. The ground beneath their feet shook, and the lights flickered as the tigers burst into the room. Stratos led them, his presence as commanding as ever, his mechanical limbs shimmering in the dim light, his eyes glowing with ancient intelligence. The other tigers followed, their movements graceful and lethal, their instincts sharpened by the storm's energy. The armed personnel hesitated, their weapons lowered, unsure of what to do in the face of such raw power. Dr. Fallon took a step back, her lips pressed into a thin line. Kia stepped forward, her hand outstretched, feeling the connection between her and Stratos. The tiger's voice echoed in her mind once more. "The storm is no longer a weapon. It is our protector." The realization washed over Kia with a sense of finality. The corporation's hold over Terra-9 had ended, and now the Guardians would restore balance. The storm, once a force of destruction, would become the planet's shield. Dr. Fallon's eyes narrowed in defiance. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice bitter. "This is far from over." But Kia only smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. "No, Dr. Fallon. It's just beginning." The wind outside howled, but it no longer felt like a threat. It was a song of rebirth. And for the first time, Kia felt truly free. The tigers, together with Stratos, stood at her side, their eyes fierce and unyielding. They were the planet's guardians, and Terra-9 would never again be held captive by those who sought to exploit it. And as the storm's energy pulsed through the sky, Kia knew that this was only the first of many storms to come. But with the guardians by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. For Terra-9 had been reborn, and so had she.